Hello, everybody. This is David in the new episode of TMM, Season 0, Episode 6, I believe. And
Yep.
I'm here with Matthew Smith, who is today going to probably talk the most of the time because he has a very cool story related to what's going on the market, especially in IoT. So, Matthew, take it away.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, David, and welcome to the Technological Mind Meld, Season 0, Episode 6. Yeah, pleasure to be with you again. And we were originally going to cover a different topic for this episode, but seeing as there were two major announcements in the last week or 10 days in the news in the IoT and connectivity space, I think it's worth maybe using this episode to just kind of go through a little bit of I don't know, a bit of a family tree, a little bit of an opinionated piece on these two transactions that are most certainly going to have an impact in the connectivity space, wireless connectivity for IoT um, in the near future. And so the first one, which was announced sometime end of last week, was a transaction between Teles, which again has a fascinating history of its own. So Teles, very much known in the digital security space, and have a very broad portfolio of products and services that run the range from cybersecurity consulting on one side, all the way through to being a very well-known manufacturer of SIM cards and other smart card tokens that are used for banking and mobile telephony. So that's Thales. And Thales uh, mm, uh, announced, or there was this joint announcement where Thales and a company called Telit, who, for those of us who've been a long time in the business, still see Telit as an Italian company from Trieste. Um, but obviously, Telit has been headquartered in the United States for a number of years. Telit are a manufacturer of cellular connectivity products, so typically modems, routers, gateway products. Um, and Thales and Telit announced that they would be effectively doing a transaction to where Telit would be acquiring the IoT device or cellular device product business from Thales, and Thales would take a shareholding of Telit. So they would take a part ownership of this new company. And the company is going to be named Telit Centurion, which is really curious because the name Centurion had almost disappeared. Centurion was a quite a well-known manufacturer from a long time ago of modems and cellular routers and various products that we used in the machine-to-machine communication space, pretty much in the days before we referred to all of this device connectivity as Internet of Things.
Mhm.
And sure enough, this name Centurion has come back. There's obviously still some kind of recognition in that brand. After all, the actual device, either if they're modules, modems, gateways, or routers that are put on the market or commercialized by Thales, still carry Centurion as as the brand for that particular range of hardware.
Okay.
So that's kind of curious. So um, that's the first one. The
Okay.
second announcement, which came earlier this week, is that Semtech, who is a very large semiconductor component manufacturer, and at the same time, since about 10 years, a decade thereabouts, is the owner of the LoRa and LoRaWAN intellectual property, and obviously
Mm.
commercializes the components, the chips, the actual radio chips that are used
So they
in
hold the
IoT devices.
patents,
Yeah, they hold the patents. They own the IP. They own the
and
IP.
but
Yeah.
were they the original ones that created this technology?
No, so Semtech acquired a startup that was literally formed just up the valley, about 10 minutes drive from where I'm based, called s0e6. So
Mm.
this was a French startup that came out of the research environment here in Grenoble, where I'm based. And s0e6 invented LoRa and LoRaWAN. And when they reached a certain inflection point, Semtech acquired their intellectual property. They acquired the startup
Mm.
s0e6 and merge that
Okay.
into their product portfolio. So anyway, so the big announcement was that Semtech have announced that they will be acquiring Sierra Wireless. Now, Sierra Wireless is another very interesting company because Sierra Wireless, for the most part, is a direct competitor of Telit.
Mm.
Okay, so Telus and Telit are basically teaming up, and Telit basically creating, or kind of like growing, or doing an inorganic sort of like growth with to create Telit Centurion. And what's kind of curious is that Centurion, when it was still independent and still called Centurion, was actually a also a competitor of Telit and Sierra Wireless when both Tenet and Sierra were pure play hardware product manufacturers.
Mhm.
So Sierra Wireless is headquartered in Canada. They're a Canadian company, but they have a pretty big international footprint. And one of the things that made their footprint quite big and also allowed them to diversify their portfolio of products and services was their acquisition in the late 2000s of a French company called Wavecom, which was headquartered just outside Toulouse in the southwest of France. And Wavecom brought something very interesting to the table for Sierra Wireless. They brought software and web-based platforms for doing things with data and connecting devices. So it was a way of providing the other end of the machine-to-machine jigsaw puzzle, right? So whereas Sierra Wireless had built up a pretty strong track record in creating their modems and router products, and they're pretty robust stuff. In fact, I'm staring at a very old Sierra Wireless modem
Okay.
from pre-Wavecom acquisition. In fact, I'll just
Ah.
reach over and show you. Um, so yeah, so that's the old Sierra
Okay.
Wireless logo, and this was a device called the lights a bit bright.
If you
It's a
bring
bit.
it close, it's going to keep it close and wait for a second. Yeah,
There you
there you go.
go. So this was a product called the Raven XT, which is actually a 2G GPRS
Oh, okay.
industrial modem. And yeah, back in a former life, I was evaluating this, and this was actually an engineering sample that was, how can I say, it was one of those sort of like giveaways for a project that we were scoping out. And I remember
Hmm.
taking this across to the Arab Emirates in 2008 to basically
Okay.
do some demos for a customer application.
Mm.
But yeah, pretty good stuff. And you know, when Sierra bought Wavecom, they now had a richer portfolio, and they also had now a proper foothold in Europe. In fact, at the time when I was dealing with Sierra Wireless, there was one guy from Sierra Wireless, a French Canadian guy, French speaking Canadian guy, who was based in Paris, who I got to know, and he was literally the guy that was kind of representing Sierra in Western Europe. And then they made this big acquisition, it was, 275 million euro acquisition back
Okay.
2009 timeframe, and suddenly they kind of like ended up getting this critical mass in Western Europe, and things took off from there. And we'll find quite a lot of leftover pieces of the former Wavecom kind of approach inside Sierra's current portfolio. So anyway, I know I've spent a little bit more time than maybe I should have on Sierra Wireless and where they've come from. But there's an interesting footnote here, which, if we want to join the dots to make it really wild, okay. So Semtech obviously punted for and acquired Cyclio, which had invented LoRaWAN. Okay,
Mhm.
right. LoRaWAN, when it was created by Cyclio, was directly competing against a rival technology called Sigfox,
Okay.
which was also invented around the same time and was invented in Toulouse. So this is another bit of this rivalry between Toulouse in the southwest and Grenoble in the southeast.
Ah.
Okay,
Okay.
in terms of like who's the king of IoT,
Mhm.
and and new low power wide area networking radio technologies. But what was very curious is that when Sierra bought Wavecom, they actually closed down a lot of their activities in Wavecom's old headquarters in La Beige outside Toulouse
Mhm.
and moved their headquarters for France, or for, yeah, basically the headquarters for France, to just outside Paris. And there's a
Mhm.
bunch of people that didn't want to move from Toulouse to Paris for
Okay.
obvious reasons. And here's the funny thing: is a lot of former senior people, execs, and yeah, again, some of the key drivers that were brought on in the early days of Sigfox came from Wavecom. Okay, so there's an interesting little bit of a footnote there, right?
Mhm.
That by virtue of Sierra having basically inorganically grown its presence in Western Europe,
Mhm.
they acquired French technology, and a consequence of that was that some of the team went off and joined the whole LP-WAN IoT connectivity adventure with a rival, a direct competitor of the technology that Semtech now owns.
Right.
That's another curious little bit there in the picture.
Mhm.
Um, so, but the other question is like, what does this mean? Why the hell is a semiconductor component manufacturer, right? And before LoRaWAN, Semtech were known for doing fairly, I would say, you know, really good, robust, but not kind of like crazy advanced, semiconductor components. They've got a lot of really strong bread and butter, components, everyday components used in designs. I mean, I use in our designs, I use a lot of Semtech rail clamps, which are
Oh.
protective diode circuits. So rail
Mhm.
clamp is a type of diode that you use to protect from static discharge. So
Mhm.
if you're somewhere dry, if there's lightning or whatever, you don't end up blowing a
I see.
component, a more critical component.
Mhm.
So so it's like, oh yeah, Semtech. These are the guys that do certain types of components that are, as I say, bread and butter stuff.
Mhm.
But they definitely hit a strong play with LoRaWAN,
Mhm.
and become highly regarded in the IoT connectivity space, but for very low power, kind of typically battery operated and very small messaging type applications. And here's the thing: is that Sierra Wireless aren't really playing in that space, apart from a little bit of NB-IoT, narrowband IoT.
Okay.
So NB-IoT is a one of the cellular standards that came up as a reaction to the rise of Sigfox and LoRaWAN.
Mhm.
So Sigfox and LoRaWAN caught the telecom industry, the traditional telecom sector, off guard.
Mhm.
And I remember this very clearly, back 2015, thereabouts, where there was a bit of a panic in some of the major, let's call them blue chip, telcos in Europe.
Hmm.
Companies like Deutsche Telekom, Orange, Telefonica, Telecom Italia, British Telecom, and again kind of the cellular side of the industry more than the fixed industry.
Hmm.
So T-Mobile, Germany, everything everywhere, EE in the UK, and of course Orange and Telefonica O2 for the mobile side.
Right.
Um, they were all caught off guard because there were these two kind of like young upstarts, right? So Sigfox, which had managed to stay kind of invested.
Hmm.
They were obviously raising capital as a startup. So they were going the classic sort of startup, investment round route,
Hmm.
and raising investment. Whereas Ciclio did an exit very early before they hit like a big critical mass. So they weren't trying to become a unicorn. Sigfox had unicorn ambitions. Ciclio basically wanted to get acquired in so that there was some IP, ownership in the broader market.
Okay.
So those two things played out very different. They were two very different strategies. But anyway, both of them shocked and shook up the telecom industry. So there was
Mhm.
this knee-jerk reaction, and the 3GPP, right, the third generation
But
partnership
why people
project.
reacted like this?
Uh,
Because they were afraid of prices, components. Sure, that like.
no, they were kind of caught with a glaring hole in their connectivity portfolio.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so all of the focus had been on getting LTE deployments underway, doing mobile
Hmm.
broadband, doing higher speed packet networking, and obviously services that work well with smartphones because it's a big mass market,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And they had forgotten that there was a chunk that they had very comfortably monetized and got very comfortable with,
Hmm.
right? Because very low data volume per month, but a large volume typically of devices, of machine to machine type use
Right.
cases. A great example of this, so two very great examples, and again, it comes back into sort of talking about Thales in a moment,
Hmm.
is banking, payment terminals
Okay. Oh, yeah.
for doing credit card, debit card payments. So terminals you have in a store, merchant
Hmm.
terminals. So even today, one of the biggest install bases of legacy 2G GPRS technology is found within the um, in the payment terminal sector.
Mm. Okay.
So there hasn't been this switch just yet, and there was no technology in the portfolio of telecom operators to propose an alternative or a more modern
Hmm.
approach, right?
Right.
And so they really had missed the ball of listening to the market, listening to customers, and understanding sort of like where the direction of travel
Hmm.
would be. And for me, having worked 15 plus years ago with much earlier cellular technologies, the one downside of using 2G and 3G networks for machine communication is that you don't really have very good energy efficiency.
Ah.
So it means either larger batteries, more frequent replacement of batteries, or fixed power or some other
Hmm.
external power source.
Right.
And that's because in order to register and do some of the initial call setup on a 2G network, you need 2 amps of current
That's a lot.
peak to be able to do certain things.
Wow.
Yeah. So in terms of its current draw and therefore the power, that is required. Yeah. And this has all got to do with the way cellular technology was designed back in the early 90s.
Okay.
Okay. And so anyway, so you have these upstarts that these startups that come out and start disrupting the industry, and they did it in a pretty, yeah, pretty aggressive way. And so there was this knee-jerk reaction of like, oh man, well we're gonna have to kind of like find, we're gonna have to rush a standard, okay?
Ah.
And the problem with the cellular or with the telecom industry is a lot of it's designed by committee,
Mhm.
right? So if you're familiar with ITSI, right, ETSI, right, the European Telecommunications Standards
Mhm.
Institute, which is in Sofia Antipolis, nearby Nice in
Okay.
France, it's their headquarters. So if you ever were to go and read any of the telecom standards, the European telecom standards, you'll get so bored reading them because they were designed by committee.
Got it.
And the same is true for the GSMA or the 3GPP, third generation partnership project, still called 3GPP.
Mhm.
However, we're now talking about the fifth generation of cellular connectivity. But anyway, there is a whole process for generating these standards. Anyway, so um, two somewhat competing standards were kind of proposed, which today are now known as narrowband IoT or NB-IoT, and then the other one is LTE-M, LTE Cat 1M.
Okay.
Okay. All right. And anyway, there are other acronyms that are used. So you have EMTC, which is an acronym for LTE-M, and you've also got NB1, and now coming out is NB2 for NB-IoT. Anyway, so here's the thing. Coming back full circle to this whole thing is that obviously, depending on as a telecom operator, who are you affiliated with for your equipment and your core and radio networking, right? So who are you affiliated with? So the market today is kind of controlled by typically three big name entities. You've got
Well, Nokia. No.
Ericsson, you've got Nokia,
Mhm.
and you have Huawei.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So those are the three guys, right? So Ericsson, Nokia, European. Huawei,
Mhm.
Chinese.
And I'm assuming like Europe doesn't
And
like
if we look,
Chinese too much anymore.
well, we're coming to the geopolitical part right now about why these transactions occurring. So, but it's important to kind of understand the
Right.
technology sort of like,
Yeah.
piece first. So NB-IoT is was pushed the hardest by Huawei,
Mhm. No, why is that?
and there's a reason
Yeah.
why. It's because also in the around 2012, somewhere thereabouts. Might be getting the dates wrong. 2012, 2013. Huawei bought a British startup, an English startup called Noil,
Mhm. What were they doing?
Neul, Noil, and Noil had also come out with a competing LPWAN invention. So you had Sigfox, LoRaWAN, who we all know about, but no one today, the name Noil,
Mhm.
no one's heard
No.
about, right? And it's kind of interesting. I know the NDA I signed with Noil before they were acquired is long since expired,
Okay.
but I did have the pleasure of having a number of conversations with the founder and former CEO of
Oh,
Noil,
okay.
who's still in Cambridge. And it's really brilliant, radio engineer. And I mean, Noil were doing some cool stuff. Their original intention was to, again, have a system that could be used for what was known as digital dividend frequencies, or otherwise known as TV white space. Okay, so yeah, I'll probably say things that are
Yeah,
like you've
I've
never
never
heard
heard
of,
of it.
right?
You'll have to
Right.
explain a little bit.
So
I mean, unless you think the audience know this stuff, then we can skip over it.
no, it's good. It's good to talk about this, and then again, for those that actually do tune in and listen to this episode that do come from a telecom industry or from a radio background, I mean, you definitely know about this. So, when you were a kid, when I was a kid, we had analog
Yeah,
TV on UHF,
yeah,
right? You basically had the antenna, you plugged it in, you demodulated it, and it was all fuzzy, wuzzy on the
right.
screen,
Yeah.
right? We Not that long ago, we switched over and started to switch over to digital broadcast, DVB
Okay.
TV. All right. So today, if you turn on a TV, chances are in Italy you will have zero analog channels.
Right.
Here in France, there's zero analog TV left. Only digital broadcasting
Hmm.
is, you know, using the DVB-T standard. Anyway, one of the reasons for that was to free up radio spectrum in the 700 megahertz band, because TV broadcast takes up a lot of bandwidth, analog TV
I see.
broadcast. You're able to put a lot more um, data, right, through the digital
Right.
standard. So it's compressed, uses MPEG 4
Right.
compression. So it's much more bandwidth efficient.
Question.
Okay, so that means that the rate. Yeah, go
So
ahead.
5G uses part of this 700 spectrum, megahertz spectrum, is it?
Yeah, and even 4G LTE, right?
But wasn't the
It's
idea
been
of get rid of analog because of 5G, or it was more to that, or it's just a part of it?
it was an accelerator,
Ah, okay.
definitely. When so again, done sort of like getting too distracted.
Okay, so let's not go
There is
into that.
a
But I was just wondering, like, if
yeah,
like that getting that extra spectrum was just
yeah.
also to allow 5G to get that part.
There, there was a strong push from stakeholders across the radio and telecommunications space to get regulators in different geographic territories in countries to or regions to again coordinate the switch over to digital broadcast in order to free up um, bandwidth that could be used for broadband.
Right.
But at the time when this initiative started, it wasn't directed at fourth generation, fifth generation cellular.
I see.
There were other radio technologies that were emerging. So you probably have heard of a technology called WiMAX.
Yes. Yes. But
Okay, so WiMAX, yeah. So WiMAX was kind of intended as a fixed broadband radio,
yeah,
fixed
but it
wireless
wasn't
broadband,
successful, right? It
right?
basically came up and then died, right?
Yeah, true, and that is also because of the dominance of, let's say, the cellular, you know, uh,
Hmm.
industry, and the fact that today, if you, I mean, it doesn't really seem to be, and again, I'm very happy to, again, have a counter opinion on this, but for me, it doesn't seem like there is much benefit in using some of these radio technologies that were designed for fixed wireless, where you could actually do the same thing with LTE. And when I say LTE, I'm talking about 4G and 5G and
Okay, yeah.
beyond, right? Because this is LTE just stands for long-term evolution, and it was the departure point from the third generation and then generations that come after the third generation. Because that was the radical tipping point of
Right.
change for the cellular industry. All right. Anyway, so kind of back onto the sort of topic here that's curious about. So okay, so why are these guys acquiring each other and why do these
Yeah.
transactions? Um, so what some folks have speculated, and again, even Semtech and Sierra Wireless have alluded to this in their press releases, is that Semtech is
Hmm.
LoRaWAN, and Sierra Wireless is great at doing cellular. They do routers, they do kind of like these kind of small gateway type products, modems, etc. And they've got an interesting, quite vertically integrated platform play, which kind of goes from, they call it from chip to
Right.
cloud. And Semtech seem to like this because basically they say, well, okay, cool, we can, we got chips. Sierra Wireless basically builds things
Hmm.
using chips, and then they also do connectivity and they do online
Hmm.
platforms. And it seems like this is an attempt to basically provide a more vertical kind of play and do some consolidation, particularly in the space of where, or segments where there are customers that like to buy things vertically
Hmm.
integrated,
I see.
do a one-stop
Right.
shop. Um, Again, this is my own opinion, and it just comes from having used a lot of Sierra Wireless products over, it's like 2007,
Hmm.
2008. So, 15 years. Plus, then doing some more recent projects with customers who were historical Sierra Wireless customers. And one of the things we did was to, with my company, was to kind of bring some freedom of choice and to help unlock, because one of the things that's annoying is that you get kind of like locked in.
Okay. Right. I mean, that's the play that we want to have,
Well,
like lock people down, so it's harder to get out.
yeah. So yeah, if you're the type of customer that wants to buy, everything. So I want a modem, a
Mhm.
router, some,
Yeah.
again,
You have
I
the
want,
full
I want,
solution.
I want the device,
Yeah.
right? But I also want the device to come with a SIM card
Right.
inside, or a chip inside the
Yeah.
device
Yeah.
that is the same as a SIM card. It's soldered on, and I also want when this thing to be registered in a platform or be part of a platform
Hmm.
immediately, and all I want to do is use that platform to enable my
Right.
application. Then I would say, hey, great, go talk to Sierra Wireless. They're actually pretty damn good at it. They put a lot of effort in. They've done it quite well. Have they done it well for all of their clients? I would say no. I would say that one thing that's already complicated is when you're trying to do something heterogeneous, and very often you've got use cases that require uh, other hardware, other connectivity, other platform pieces, and other integrations. Um, but hey, it's going to be interesting to see, because here's the kicker with Semtech, right? So Semtech have taken a very kind of open approach. They've been
Wait, wait. I
very
have a
strong
question.
on building an
So Semtech is now
yeah.
going to compete with Thales. Is that the point?
No, they could never directly compete because their portfolio of products and services are very
But
different.
so so
Thales and
what's
Semtech.
the this big hype right now on this I don't know acquisitions, whatever you want to call them, because if Telit and Sierra have similar technologies, right? And Semtex now owns Sierra, which
Yeah.
has those technologies, and Thales kind of owns them, meaning they buy stuff from them for shares or whatever the logic is. Um, so
Mm.
what's the problem? I would, that would be the simplest question. Or is there a problem, or is this like just the market is consolidating into something to a monopoly?
No, this is consolidation. It's just interesting when you start unpacking the kind of context and the history, uh, to kind of see the similarities, but also to highlight the differences. Okay, so if you don't mind me just
Oh yeah,
finishing
sure.
what I was going to say about Semtech, and then we'll actually get on to Thales and Telit and go through a little bit of their kind of background, and then contrast that play against the Semtech Sierra
Okay,
play
got it.
that I was talking about. So I know we spent a lot of time talking about Sierra, um, Semtech as well. Semtech, one of the things that they have been extremely strong, and to be honest, have earned a lot of respect in the overall market space, is their commitment to building an ecosystem and to creating really good engagement and community of players that play well together, because they have recognized that it's a broad church. Now, it's kind of easier if you are one of the if you have a vital building block, like a vital
Right.
little piece of the jigsaw puzzle that
Mhm.
everyone needs. So Semtech, absolutely, they have IP that goes into a component, into a physical chip. You cannot build a LoRaWAN device or a gateway without using a component that contains IP from Semtech.
Oh wait, so Simtek literally
Okay,
owns even
and
the hardware.
Semtech
They
on.
don't even license that to anybody.
Yeah, they make the hardware, right? The IP goes into their
Oh wow,
hardware.
so they're the only one that can. So oh wow, so okay, got it.
Exactly, exactly. So that's their unfair advantage. And they did a really smart move by doing it that way. Okay, because literally you want to build, billions of IoT devices with
Mhm.
a LoRaWAN communication capability. Well, you're going to have to somehow, Semtech are going to need to produce billions of chips that go into these
Wow,
billions of
okay.
devices. So that's understandable, and obviously to get there, there's a lot of evangelization, a lot of ecosystem building, a lot of partnerships, a lot of cooperation, competition,
Mhm.
collaboration, co-creation. All those things are important, and Ziptech have done a really good job on that. And again, I have a lot of respect, and particularly to the people who I know and know well from Semtech. Who have been part of that journey and have also supported my company as well along the way when we built solutions with LoRaWAN. So, but I want to say this is that what is curious is that because Sierra Wireless have taken a somewhat opposite approach, so they've built up kind of like a developer
Mhm.
program, but the developer program is all about doing things in a vertically integrated way. Hey, come onto our platform. You get device connectivity and platform access, and all you need to do is focus on writing some application code because we've done all the heavy lifting. So kind of like here's a set of black boxes that you can't
Mhm.
really look inside. So that is very different to Centec's approach, where when it comes to software, when it comes to some of the key enablers, right? There's been good support of open source software for example, some of the embedded code that needs to run on microcontrollers that allows you to interface to the
Mhm.
Semtech chip. It's spearheaded a lot of different, interesting competing gateway technologies and also then platform technologies to manage gateways,
Okay.
fleets of gateways. And so I'm kind of curious to see how that is going to collide with Sierra Wireless's approach, or whether that'll even matter. But my suspicion of this is that Semtech would like to again leverage Sierra Wireless's strength with cellular, because in some markets, cellular backhaul with LoRaWAN device connectivity is a
Right,
big thing.
exactly. So yeah,
And I mean, I believe in this, right? So, you've got a SIM card, I connect to the internet or to my platform over cellular, and then I'm providing a gateway that allows a lot of
exactly. Yeah.
LoRaWAN devices,
Yep.
small
Yep. Yep.
devices to
Yep.
communicate.
Yeah, not that.
Yeah, and that makes sense. However, there's a ton of players in the market that builds
Mhm.
those products and also offer open products and products where you have a choice for systems integrators to recommend solutions and build solutions that are fit for purpose for end user customers to choose, for basically a number of different actors in the value chain to be part of the same ecosystem. And so by bringing in Sierra Wireless, you sort of understand, okay, does this mean you're going to lock this down? You're going to change the rules of the game? Does it mean that some of the platform bits are going to be weighted towards Sierra Wireless and not other players like Things Industries, for example? Um, and then gateway manufacturers that are well known that have built up a really good track record like Curlink and Tech, right? So it's interesting to see how this is going to have consequences in the landscape in the
Right.
next year or so.
Okay. But can we go back? Maybe I didn't get it. Like Thales and Pellet, right? So how are these
Hmm.
two play? Like, what's the change in the market after this move that they did?
Right. So basically, that means that Thales no longer has a hardware products business for routers, gateways, and
Oh,
modems,
because Telet is providing that.
because that business has been, let's say, acquired by Telit in exchange for part ownership by Thales. So Thales will be a part owner of the new business, but they're basically creating a
So
consolidated
let
player.
me try to see if I can understand. So Telet will make that, like Telet was making the hardware and is going to make the hardware, correct?
Telit makes
Okay.
stuff that
Okay.
looks
So that's why
similar
they're
to
similar to
this.
Sierra.
So to, today, so does Telit, because of the Centurion acquisition, which was made by a company that Thales bought a few years ago called
Mhm.
Gemalto.
But so Thales, what
Okay.
Thales brings to the table? Because Semtech, we know that they bring LoRa thing,
Ah,
and Thales, what aside from money, what do they give? I mean, Thales is super happy. It's like, hey, we get all your clients. We're going to even have more hardware that we can sell them, right? And plus, you have shares in our company. That's even better. So what else? Aside of
hmm.
that, do they bring something else?
So I mean, so this kind of tells me that it kind of frees up attention for Thales to focus on the some of the other sides of of the landscape or the business,
Mhm.
the markets. So again, Telus is kind of like play, as I said, in digital
Ah,
security. So they've got very strong plays in biometrics, in as I say,
mm.
smart cards, which is again thanks to the acquisition of Gemalto. All right, so Gemalto is a merger of a company
Mhm.
called GemPlus and another company called Axalto.
How do you remember these names, Matthew?
And
Like, how do you
Exa-
do that? Like, how does your brain work?
well, 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 because well, because because I was part of the creation
Oh,
of
okay.
Axalto. All right, I was actually I played a fairly modest role in that because I was actually responsible, um, 20 years ago for being part of the IT infrastructure carve out project or
Uh-huh.
divestiture kind of spin out project that led to the creation of Axalto. So Axalto actually came from Schlumberger, who I used to work for 20 odd years ago. Schlumberger had a division called
Uh-huh.
Tests and Transactions. It's all in the name, transactions, right? And Tests and Transactions, one of their big lines of business was
Mm.
smart cards. They ended up becoming the world's largest manufacturer of smart cards, SIM cards, bank cards, um,
Yeah, anything that has the chip on the on a card, right?
any type of
Mhm.
chip card, right? Yeah. Um, so smart cards that are used for
Mhm.
loyalty
Yeah,
programs,
basically.
for again for all sorts of things. But the two main applications really is
Mhm.
in banking
Right.
and in telecom, right? Um, yeah, and of course they became the largest manufacturer of smart cards because of an acquisition of another big French player called CP8, which came from Bull. So if you're familiar with Bull, the French IBM, right? So Bull, who are well known for high
No idea.
performance computing today,
You're
supercomputers.
the name guy. I have to see a
BULL.
logo to remember
Yeah.
if I even know them. I can.
Right. Yeah. Well. Even though Bull sort of exists, the name Bull is still around. Bull actually got acquired by Atos.
Ah, okay.
Um, eh, yeah. So Atos owns Bull now. So you can already see where some of this consolidation, and there's a lot of weird history here as well, of like companies buying other companies or
Right.
selling other companies, right? So um, Thales, the backstory of Thales is Thales was more well known as being a defense
Mhm.
contractor.
Ah, Thales is is a defense contractor
All right.
for the French
Yeah,
government, I'm assuming.
Thales before they were called Thales were
Mhm.
called Thomson
For the French
CSM,
government,
right?
I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, yeah, not only French defense, but kind of
Anything
like
defense.
defense, so missile guidance systems and
Oh,
weapon
okay.
systems, all sorts of crazy stuff. And there was there's also been a tie-in with a couple of other companies because they were involved. They had a joint venture with Raytheon. If you're familiar with Raytheon, who's another well-known defense
Mhm.
contractor in
Okay.
America.
But so with this Telit and Sierra, so basically mostly like these two companies are not going to compete with each other, right? Because if they're doing similar products, now they have these two
Yeah,
completely different I don't know how they call them, like big brothers, or yeah, kind of complete different type of big brothers, and they will have a
yeah,
completely different approach. Yeah, because like these guys are going to cater towards one part of the clients, and these are going to have the same as someone else similar, but yeah, also in the same
yeah,
style with all integrating with
yeah.
everything. Okay, so who do you think is going to be more
Yes, to make it
successful?
even. So if we were to look at it as sort of on a purely competitive basis, I reckon that and you know what, I feel like I want to hedge my bets, but I would probably lean more towards the Semtech
Hmm.
Sierra tie-in, um, because because right, the, that extra magic ingredient
Hmm.
called LoRaWAN. All right, for me
Yeah, because I mean, if people didn't
is the
get it,
magic.
I have no clue whatsoever about this market when it comes to this acquisition and stuff. But from what you're saying, like
Mm,
this merge acquisition, whatever we want to call it, seems to make way more sense. Meaning, Centec has something solid, Sierra has
mm,
something solid. That if they combine their forces, they can create actually a great solution, especially for places where
yeah.
connectivity is scarce, and you can connect lots of devices over LoRa and then have one central point that forwards the message,
Mm.
right? Where with Telit, it's a little bit more loose and kind of hard to get the benefit of this transaction, this deal. It's a little bit more, yeah, there's nothing more tangible, right? It seems to be more a benefit for talent. It's like, hey, great, thank you for the money, and thank you for ordering lots of our hardware, and that's about it, right?
Well, I think it would probably be useful to just take a quick moment and um, look at Telet briefly. I mean, I was kind of Talis has a huge story behind it, right? And I did mention how they again expanded in their digital security portfolio by acquiring Gemalto, which again was this merger of GemPlus and Axalto. Anyway, just to kind of like complete that little footnote. So the original patents for smart cards. Okay, so the
Mm-hmm.
actual smart card,
Yeah, yeah.
which you use for a SIM card or a bank card. Okay, so anyway, this kind of the story goes is that the guy who invented the technology, all right, actually worked for a
Mm-hmm.
research unit at Schlumberger, um, and anyhow, he ended up leaving and
Uh,
forming Gen Plus, and so part of the
mm-hmm.
IP was owned by Schlumberger, and then other parts of the IP that came later were owned by Gen Plus. So they had to cross
Uh,
license.
okay.
They basically had to basically cross license and
Mm-hmm.
have royalty type agreements in order to commercialize the smart card technology into the market. And anyway, so these were two fierce rivals, and anyway, there were other players that came on the market that licensed key technology building blocks. And anyway, there's a whole fascinating story behind the history of smart cards, which is
Can you
probably
remind me
worth
who
looking
owns
at
the
in a
smart cards,
future
Thales or
episode.
Thales? Thales, smart cards. Thales.
Thales, Thales, today, thanks to the Gemalto acquisition. But because Gemalto ended up buying a hardware
Mm-hmm.
manufacturer, right? And this is the other crazy thing: is like, why did Gemalto actually buy Centurion? That was the thing that was kind of weird. Why would a company which was into digital kind of like um, you
Mm-hmm.
know tokens basically, right? And at the same time, we're working on other technologies. So, I mean, let's just be clear here, right? So, Gemalto were also
Mm-hmm.
doing smart card readers. So, the kinds of things that went into
Right.
notebook
To have access
computers. I mean,
to.
this is
Yeah,
stuff we
yeah.
were using 20 years ago for doing PKI encryption and
Signing.
digital security
Yeah, yeah.
credentials. There's all that kind of token stuff, yeah, and for signing things. And then of course this was the other thing which made the Thales and Gemalto, the acquisition of Gemalto interesting is that both Thales and Gemalto were very strong
Mm-hmm.
players in HSMs. So do you know what an HSM
I
is?
should know.
A
Okay.
hardware
Yes.
security
Got it.
module.
Yep.
Okay. So again, you tend to use HSMs in very specific context, like when you are wanting to, for example, generate private keys for example,
Mm.
mass manufacturing of
Right.
like
Yeah.
millions of smart cards. You've got some private keys for the manufacturer that
Right.
need to be protected, and some of these HSMs come in multiple parts, and you
Mm-hmm.
need to turn three keys at the same time, or have one person do something biometric and another person do something. So again, there's a whole bunch of we talk about key
Mm-hmm.
signing ceremonies, right? And HSMs enable these ceremonies to happen. That again can ensure that there's a very
Mm-hmm.
strong degree of trust that this because imagine if someone got
Yes.
hold
Game
of a
over.
private key
Yeah.
for millions of cards, game over, right? Yeah. And I mean, 20 years ago, there was some of the stuff I was working on regarding firewalls and secure networking with my previous employer. That a big user of that was the smart card division of testing transactions at Schlumberger. So anyway, it's all kind of interesting to see how this whole arrangement has turned out. But anyways, GemPlus decided to kind of broaden their portfolio. They bought Centurion. Centurion were, I would say they were kind of struggling against Sierra Wireless's
Mhm. Okay.
rise in the market, right? And whereas Sierra Wireless expanded east, meaning they went
Mhm.
from North America to Europe, Telit did the opposite. They went from Europe
Right.
to the United States, right? Because as
Mhm.
you know, they're headquartered in California now, whereas
Mhm.
they were headquartered in Italy, although they still
Okay,
do a lot
that's
of
right.
engineering in Italy.
I mean, okay, so that is has some
Yeah,
something that they
but what?
bring to the table, but it seems yeah they're going to target a
Yes,
completely different market. Um,
it 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 looks like Thales would like to kind of like again reprioritize and get out of doing
mhm.
gateway type hardware and would rather achieve some kind of economy of
Mhm.
scale, critical mass,
Right.
whatever, rationalization. Because after all, what this was going to mean is it means that some products in
Mhm.
the portfolio are going to be rationalized, which means that either Centurion products or Tele
Right.
products are going to disappear. It's going to be
Mhm.
products that will be retired, and it'll be interesting to see which wins. So it's been a long time since I've actually
Mhm.
used Telet hardware, um, and was kind of curious as I don't really, yeah, I don't. It was never really in terms of modem modules, was never really
I
something
see.
that ticked my boxes.
Interesting.
Anyway,
Yeah.
um, but let me mention this about Telet. So Telet also, the late 2000s, around the time that Sierra bought Wavecom, Telet got into non-cellular connectivity kind of before the big
Okay.
LP WAN explosion. They bought a French company called
Okay.
1RF. 1RF were doing non-cellular lower power radio modules, but they were much shorter range and designed very differently. They were kind of like some of the precursor technologies. So what Telit did is they actually sort of got into the non-cellular
Mhm.
device connectivity game
Ah.
too early. They were able to expand their footprint
Mhm.
into France from Italy because of that. But I remember working on a project back in
Mhm.
2008 and dealing with 1RF. And then it was actually this project went into 2009, and again I was there, sitting down with 1RF in Sofia Antipolis or
Mhm.
Piot next to Nice in the south of France, and they were in the process of being acquired by Tenet. And they were like, "Hey, soon we're going to be part of Tenet." Oh,
Okay.
all right, so that's interesting. Um, and yeah, but you don't really hear about 1RF anymore, and that
Mhm.
technology all fell away when Sigfox and LoRaWAN kind
Right.
of became the dominant players. So, and particularly LoRaWAN has now emerged as the
Mhm.
strongest
Yeah,
non-cellular
there's also lots of
device
hobbyists
IoT
that try
leader.
to use it in their like DIY projects. It's quite cheap modules that you can buy from
Yeah,
AliExpress.
uh, yeah, e- exactly. And I think this is the thing that kind of sets it apart, right? Because that's interesting
Mhm.
for a company like Semtech, because
Yeah.
Semtech get to build volume, right? It's the same with other component
Mhm.
manufacturers like Microchip, who do who do microcontrollers, and
Yeah, like Atmel, SD.
ST
Okay.
ST mic ST mic. Well
Oh,
Atmel got
okay.
acquired by Microchip,
That
so
doesn't
the
exist
name
anymore.
Atmel kind of is still around, but
Oh.
it doesn't exist. Yeah, Atmel got acquired by Microchip. They consolidated that. ST Microelectronics is obviously another player in the space for microcontrollers. So again, yes, it makes a lot of sense to sort of like get into some of the bigger volume kind of like play where if you can make it easily accessible
Yeah,
to
provide. Yeah, you play with
hobbyists.
it, you can learn
Yeah,
it, and then you bring it to work,
but
and you decide to do
yeah,
something with it.
it, it, exactly. But let's ask ourselves the kind of weird questions. I want to get into some of the geopolitics now, because I know we touched on a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
the geopolitics, but didn't really go into Huawei, Null, NB-IoT thing, and then also why Thales, Telit, Semtech, Sierra, right, are trying to create these, let's say, Western
Hmm.
consolidated
Yeah.
businesses, right, or players, vendors in the space. Now, if we think about hobbyists, right, because you mentioned
Hmm.
AliExpress, you mentioned cheap stuff, right? This is where we obviously have a great
Hmm.
blessing, right,
Oh
of
yeah.
having
Okay.
access to cheap hardware to tinker with. But the dark side of that is that that was all based on
Mm.
Chinese funny money, right? And statist
Right.
intervention
Yeah.
into the Chinese economy, right? The only reason why you can buy cheap stuff from AliExpress and buy discount hit like to be honest, if it was you or me or a French,
Hmm.
Italian, German business, right, doing the same thing, the price
Right.
point would be very
Yeah. I mean,
different
I also know that.
because
Yeah, I also
we
know
wouldn't
that, for
have the fact.
example,
Yeah,
if you're a Chinese company, you want to ship something outside of China, the government will pay for shipping.
yeah,
See,
but
but that's one of
it's
those
even more
small things
insidious
that
than that,
nobody
right?
knows about it because people are saying like, how is it possible that pen from China costs the same amount in the US, right? It's because they don't pay for shipping, um, which is crazy, and that's why they can compete at least
Yeah,
even that little
but
thing makes it the advantage massive, basically.
yeah, or a lot of it was set up as a very long game where there was capital that was allocated in more in the
Mhm.
form of soft subsidies than in terms of real investment. So if you've got real investment, there's an obligation to kind of
Mhm.
again return money, right? Get a return on that investment. But if you say, well, you know what, listen, we're going to create sort of an unfair space. The return isn't measured in the actual direct
Mhm.
return on that capital allocation. The return is measured on I've messed up someone
Right. Yeah.
else elsewhere in the world
Mhm.
because they can't compete.
Right.
I've killed their market, you know. And so, I mean, this is coming to a head big time in
Mhm.
the semiconductor space. Um, so yeah, I think just also to be kind of clear, right? I mean, the um, a lot of these plays and the
Mhm.
consolidations that are happening is all about creating, again, compelling alternatives and finding ways to give Western customers, particularly
Mhm.
large corporates who will be
Yeah.
doing big projects, so the kinds of companies that are going to be installing millions of, you know, for example, connected vehicles,
Yeah, you rather want
right?
your European
Yeah.
company than
Well,
a Chinese company that controls your car.
well, yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think where it's going to be very interesting to see sort of like the some of the blowback that happens with this. 'Cause I don't think we've even really kind of imagined or even have a feel for what might be coming down the line. I mean, this week the other big news was
Hmm.
the whole thing in Taiwan, right? With a certain American politician's visit to Taiwan and the shitstorm
Yeah.
that ensued
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think, in my
because
opinion, it's a good thing to
of
have, European technologies that allow you. Because, for example, Americans have them,
yeah,
and it's a good thing also for Europe to have its own stuff. So if something happens,
yeah,
you're not. Yeah,
yeah.
okay. It'd be nice that at least with this stuff,
But
the European government would realize. Because, for example, with energy, right? Get rid of nuclear, and let's be dependent on one country, and then oops, big problem,
mm,
right? So it'd be nice to have
Eh,
some
yeah,
local solution.
I, no, no, no. I hear you, and you're right. You're right, David. Um, I think what we're uh, again, um, events are happening faster than I think many
Mhm.
of us have expected. Um, it's all very well having photo ops, with, for example, the French president coming to 15 minutes drive up the valley to inaugurate a project to build out massive capacity
Oh,
for semiconductor
okay.
manufacturing in Western Europe. Yeah, this is the big investment that's happening. And again, it's a
Hmm.
European American alliance, a Western
Okay.
kind of like initiative. It's not just ST Microelectronics doing all of this, but I mean, we're talking about like 4 billion euros of investment in the creation of thousands of jobs to again reinforce and build up capacity. But yeah, but it's one thing announcing it, and then literally a few weeks later having planes and missiles fly
Hmm.
over the island of Taiwan, right? Rather have the thing built and in production, before you create
Right. Yeah,
a
that's true.
geopolitical shitstorm. Okay, and I mean, this is also where things don't smell so good. It doesn't pass the sniff test because you have U.S. Congress, right, going through
Hmm.
this motion of passing the CHIPS Act. If you've been following the CHIPS Act in
No, what do you mean by
the
that?
U.S., right? No, it's called
Ah,
the
okay,
acronym
got
is
it.
called the
Yeah,
CHIPS Act,
but
right?
you have a brain
CHIPS,
that
the
works
CHIPS Act,
differently than
right?
mine.
Which is
I need
again this whole big.
images. I use acronyms is
Yeah, no,
like
but I mean it's just I also follow. I do follow current
uh-huh.
affairs because it's quite important
Yeah, yeah.
just to understand kind of like the bigger picture. So anyway, there was a lot of maneuvering with getting the CHIPS Act passed. There are also accusations, and again, I'm not here. I'm here as an outsider. Obviously, I don't have any American interests, right? And but I will say this is that you have obviously the Speaker of the
Hmm.
House of Representatives, right? That was the person who went to visit Taiwan, um, whose spouse is
Hmm.
accused of insider dealing, right? Of basically making money off things that get voted through,
Right.
passed by Congress, and that doesn't really smell so good, you know. And of course, this is something which again gets a bit hyped or kind of distorted in the media, so we need to be careful here. But all I'm saying is that
Hmm.
CHIPS Act is fresh. All right, the factories haven't been
Right.
built yet. The
And
investments
already
haven't been made. Right, the
the tensions is
intention to do it
increasing. Yeah,
has been
exactly.
announced. E- exactly, exactly, exactly. So here's the big dangerous thing: is that if anything were to happen to
Hmm.
TSMC, right, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, all right, if anything was to happen to TSMC and Taiwan, the consequence of
Massive.
that
Yeah.
would be
I mean, yeah,
bad, huge, massive, compared to some of the disruption we saw due
yeah,
to
yeah.
drought in Taiwan and
I
and
mean,
and,
Apple
and
would not be able to
water
make
issues
M2
and
chips.
COVID.
In no, I mean, Intel have its own stuff, but all the other companies that use
Yeah,
TM, whatever, TSS.
TSMC,
Wow, you see the problem? And my brain doesn't
TSMC,
operate at
right?
the same
Yeah,
level. So yeah, that
yeah,
will be a massive. Like
yeah.
nothing will be made
And if
anymore. Just goodbye. Use-
yeah, and then I mean, Japan's just up the road, and South Korea is just up the road a little bit further. So again, there's that geographic proximity to where again, it's not just the
Mhm.
foundries for doing silicon, but it's the way silicon gets
Mhm.
put into packages. And actually, the most critical issue is being able to take wafers that
Mhm.
have been made, so, and then cut them into little squares or rectangles, and put them
Mhm.
into miniaturized packages. And a lot of the backlog for manufacturing is
Oh,
going from
really?
wafer into package. That's
Oh,
where there's a lot of
interesting. Never
backlog,
heard that.
right? There's also a backlog on certain processes for
Ah,
doing the
yeah. So
wafers,
that's what
right?
I
So
heard.
that's why some parts are
I
more
see.
available than others. So there are two factors to this, but the one everyone focuses on is like, yeah, but so this particular sort of millimeter and
Mhm.
nanometer process, right? We've got a shortage of capacity for making
Yeah.
these kinds of wafers, and that was because, and again, a lot of this is the rise of microcontroller IoT devices, which use some of the slightly older, larger
The chips.
width
Package.
or,
Yeah.
or resolution um,
But yeah.
process, right? 20,
Mhm.
20 nanometer process,
Yeah,
right?
because I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
an interesting point. Like back in the day, people said every device is
Mm.
going to have connected to the internet. Well, and every device needs electronics inside. And now suddenly there is so many of them that we
Yep.
don't have enough sand to go by to build all this stuff.
Yeah, very much so. So it's going to be interesting. There's also, if you look at sorry, to come back full circle to
Hmm.
where we started, right? So Telet Centurion, soon Sierra Wireless, maybe the name will stay. I think the brand's quite well recognized, but you know what? There are other players that build modems and routers, and quite a lot of them are
Hmm.
Chinese, and quite a lot of them have got a very strong track record in providing alternatives. Um, are those products still going to be available? That's the question. And I think here's the most important thing for all of us to bear in mind is, would we all be prepared to pay more, 50%, double, three times,
Hmm.
five times, for certain things that we've got very used to
Yeah,
buying cheaply?
we shall see. And I think we can end it
And
up
we shall
end,
definitely
end
see
it here.
about that.
So this is the question for the audience:
Yeah,
would you pay more if it was made in Europe? And yeah, if would you just pay more? That's the question.
yeah. I'll split the question a slightly different way, and we'll see who prefers to answer it. But if you could no longer buy cheap stuff from China, right? Would you be prepared to pay more, or would you go
Hmm.
without, right?
We'll see. Thank you everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode where Matthew brought some uh, knowledge again about the crazy history of mobile technology and IoT. And so I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you,
Mm.
Matthew, for your time. And see you, everybody.